Well, good evening. Tonight I'm um, lower in energy than for a bunch of the videos. Obviously, not all of them. If you've been watching all of them, then you'll notice some of them that are quite a bit lower energy. Um, but a lot of my attention is going to a sort of split that I keep feeling. I'm very present to a an impulse to avoid being with the pieces that are alive for me and to go into theory. Part of the reason is that the theory actually relates directly to what I am working on, but that's not the reason my mind is tugging me that way. So I'm trying not to follow the tugs off into theory land too much. There's a part of me that wants to tell the story of the West, like the Western culture, and how all of like how we ended up in a strange situation with meaning making. But I want to stay grounded in my own lived experience to the extent that I can. So that's the direction that I want to move in here. I think I'll get to the same place. So when through my teens and early to mid 20s, I had a huge emphasis on definitely kind of activism. This is very clearly a sort of activism. Um, it's just my cause was a little odd at the time, relative to the standard. I surrounded by all of these people and talking about the case with the environment and needing to deal with environmentalism, and all this stuff about social justice was bubbling up. It wasn't nearly as intense as it is today. Politically correct speech was just starting to be a thing, just starting. So, um, and a whole bunch of people were going, "What do you mean politically correct? This is absurd." Like PC culture was just getting its bearings at that time. Um, uh, but I didn't really care so much about those topics. Part of it because of the culture of my family. But um, a lot of it was because it seemed just so overwhelmingly overshadowed by aging. There's something about there's something to be said about how whatever concerns you might have about sexism or racism or any other ism along those lines, all people will die, and most deaths are gruesome. Most people will rot the flesh off of their bones while they're still alive. They will feel the degradation of their bodies and their minds and their hopes and their energies. And this was something that was very alive for me, very aware. This is like I grew up in the context of thinking about death. I gave the story of this in another video. I don't want to spend the time trying to dig into it. If you really want to understand, you can go look at one of the previous videos. I honestly don't remember which one. Um, but um, even though the topic is unusual, the energy was identical. And I threw, I don't know, somewhere in the ballpark of, it would be between about 2 and 6 hours a day into finding ways of addressing aging and moving the zeitgeist around aging, trying to figure out how do you move a culture, how do you create an ideaplex. One of my first forays, because I recognize I'm not going to have relevant leverage just being a scientist researching this stuff. I have a mind for it, but I don't think that my mind applied to the biochemistry would actually solve it. I didn't have the language for this at the time, or even all of the conceptual structures. I had more of an intuition of something like, I think it's sort of like people haven't decided. Uh, in in short, I think that if the human race were to collectively decide that aging were a real problem, and then do something like the Manhattan Project on aging, we could probably solve it in the next century. I bet we could do it in the next quarter century. We could make some pretty significant strides if we actually cared and we actually like decided this is something we wanted to deal with. So it struck me that the real problem was a lack of will. So instead of trying to go into advocacy for funding research, which I encourage, but most of my focus was on why do we lack the will? Why do we lack the will to treat it as the real problem that it is? And by the way, if you're listening to this and you're you're not on board with that, if this just sounds alien or bizarre, like, what do you mean cure aging? That's absurd. Like aging is one of the blessings of life. If that's your attitude in listening to this, the details of that may be a little confusing for someone to say. I assure you, that's not essential for the main point that I want to emphasize in this video. But there's definitely a rant that I can give. I've kind of slipped on my second point, but the first is more important. That's not going to be essential for the meat of this. I'll just assure you, to the extent that you care, that you want to care and you want to believe me, that there is a logic to this. And it's not just an egg-headed logic. There is a lived form of compassion and realism that is very grounded in the truths of the heart. It's not about just egoic grabbing, trying to fight off the horror of death as an abstraction. This is a lived reality for me. To this day, I still look at this and go, so when are we going to treat this problem seriously? Oh, you're not sure it's a problem. Interesting. Right. So it's still very alive for me. But the details of that topic don't matter that much. I'm giving some context for where I'm coming in, what I'm bringing. The main reason this matters is that if you sort of take for granted, yes, aging is bad, just to understand where I was coming from in my teens, early to mid 20s, and still now. But there's an activist type flavor here that I think is important to track. I would have an attitude that was, when somebody would push back against me with something like, yeah, like I had one friend who turned to me and said, hey, Michael, I know that you care a lot about this aging thing, but that's your thing, it's not mine. This would summon a kind of rage in me, a really significant rage. The rage had the form of, what do you mean it's not your thing? You're going to age. You, my friend, have a daughter. Your daughter is going to age and die. Don't you care about her? Don't you care about you? Don't you care about the fact that you are going to abandon your daughter to the grave? Right? So the thing to notice there, the thing that I'd really like to highlight, to share, is this way in which, like obviously that energy is manipulative. Obviously, the intent is to reach in and create pain in order to yank somebody over to a perspective that I want them to have. That's the only reason to do it. That's obviously the energy behind it. So I'm looking at those instances of me having that kind of confrontational attitude, and there's the most impeccable logic behind it. I imagine it could be packed with a keener mind, but I'm tempted to go to make a loop about explaining the mother's arm fallacy. I don't remember whether I've mentioned that in any of these videos, and it's worth bringing into context on its own, because I don't assume anybody is watching all of them by any means. Maybe this is the first one of them that you've seen, in which case this is going to be pretty weird. And the basic reasoning is that every person who advocates, any person who would advocate that death is fine, it's not an issue, that's other people's problems, I don't care, or it's actually a good thing. There was, if I remember right, the bioethicist Leon Fessinger put a whole, I'm digging up names from like 10, 15 years ago, so I might have that a little bit off, but I think that's right. Leon Fessinger had this, was a big advocate for the immorality of even moderate life extension, of getting humans to live healthy into their 110s, 120s. He thought that this would be a huge tragedy. And he made a big, big push for this. And he pissed off a lot of people in my social circles, including my family. But the thing was not just you disagree. It is your verbal noise and your position of authority. Because I think he was on, he was in the Clinton administration back with Bill Clinton. I think he was on the President's Council of Bioethics. I'm dredging up memories here, so you'd have to look this up. But the issue is that he had the ear of power and therefore had a position of significant influence. So this isn't just an idle opinion. This is somebody who is pushing an idea that would delay the enactment of technologies that would actually solve the aging problem. Just by aging causes, just by things that are the result of aging, people would die at about a rate like this. One snap is one life. So, and I would cultivate that clock. I would have an awareness of, am I using my time in a way that makes sense given how quickly everyone is dying? Right? And there's a hint there. There's a hint that if you're anything like me, the way that the nature of the hint will be when I talk about that, there's something in your gut that goes, ugh, like wrong. Okay. I think that's a very clear sign of disconnecting from the body's truth. The question is where? There's a way to hunt it down, but like that's a key signal. I think that's a very important key signal. When things feel terrifying, overwhelming, disgusting, nauseating, that's a very key sign that, oh, I am alienating myself from something true. This is, of course, not always the case. Sometimes I eat something and then I feel sick. That's the body's truth creating nausea. But if an idea creates nausea or creates a cringe, then the idea is somehow splitting the mind and the body. That's my experience, very consistently. Very consistently. And if I just keep this rule of, oh, this is pulling away from my body level truth. So I don't have to examine the content. There's something wrong here. Maybe not necessarily in the content. Maybe the words being said are technically correct, but there's something about how I am taking in the information that is alienating me from the present moment and my my sense of truth. Like my the body is the sense organ for truth, for reality. Like the eyes can see light, but like the whole body as a systematic instrument, as an emergent sense, is fitting to reality. So this is my instrument of truth. If I can't be here, right here, because of something I'm thinking, then what I'm thinking is not in touch with this. That doesn't mean it can't be made in touch, but it's worth noticing. So the thing is that this death clock, what I later come to realize is that installing this death clock and rehearsing it and practicing it was creating a pain in me that was alienating me from the experience of the present moment in a way that could actually address the thing that I was looking at in the first place. But I didn't notice any of that. I'm just putting in this death clock, creating this pain, this ticking, and this sense of rage at people like Leon Fessinger. And like my friend who said, you know, Michael, like, I know aging is important to you, but it's not my thing. I'm just not interested. Like, how dare you not be interested? It's like not being interested in the group of children drowning in the pool next to you. Oh, it's not my thing to take care of them. It's not my thing to pull them out. Yeah, I know that you care, but you're but at the very least, can you? I'm actually just now remembering so much pain and arrogance associated with this stuff. I used to have this attitude of, fine, if you don't care about all of this death, then would you kindly die and get the fuck out of the way so that the rest of us who are actually paying attention can deal with the problem? Right? So, like, having that kind of energy, like, is it kind? Like, ferocity, like, kindness is not opposed to ferocity. I can be ferocious and kind. I do this reasonably often with my girlfriend. Like, this is, and as far as I can tell, from what she's said, she seems to like it. This business of, there's something you're not saying, right? There's like a penetratingness. The force is not the problem. The problem is the lack of compassion. Would you just fucking die? Like that whole the golchab, the the dark side of will, the dark side of wisdom, as opposed to mercy. The willingness to recognize that some actions matter and some actions don't matter. That ability to make that discernment and to choose the ones that matter. The dark side of that is a capacity to condemn. The term golachab is coming from the Kabbalah, so sort of a map of states of consciousness. Golachab translates as something like the burners or the arsonists, which is it's a description of, as though there are demons that are our dark sides. This class of demons are the golachab, the readiness to condemn, the readiness to destroy because it doesn't deserve to exist. So that fire, I'm noticing I'm taking my time. I speak more slowly when trying to stay in the body. I feel like I have this whole arc of what I want to say, but I don't want to take forever to say it. The main thing that I want to highlight here is this this passion, this intensity that is focused on what seems like a very real problem, very pressing problem, something that I need other people to get on board with. I can't do it by myself. I can't cure aging by myself. And the whole reason this is an issue is because other people aren't on board. So I need to get them on board. And if they're not on board, then we need to put them on board or kick them off board, like walk the plank, because there's this sense of there is even a kind of almost a utilitarian thinking here of like, fine, if your slowness to get on board with this is going to kill by proxy even one person, if your hesitation slows us down by 5 seconds, how many people die? A lot. A lot of people die. How many people lose their beloved spouse, or their father, or their mother? Somebody that they deeply care about, a friend, because diabetes, because of a heart attack. We don't usually think of these as aging diseases, but if you cure aging, these things go away for the most part. They are downstream of aging. When we have ways of fixing certain medical problems, or at least ameliorating them, we view them as diseases. But when we don't, we view them as natural. dies of natural causes. There's no such thing as natural causes. There are causes that we don't understand what to do with, and therefore the Western medical model can't treat as a machine part to fix. The main exception I'm aware of is cancer, which is a disease of aging, in the sense that it is much more likely to happen with aging damage. But we as a culture recognize cancer as a disease, even though we don't have a way of fixing it yet. But we have some treatments that kind of work. They seem to work maybe better than no treatments, we think. I'm not sure about the science of this. So it's me getting a little off into lecture mode. There's some of these are really they're still powerful topics for me. There's still like something for us to address as a species here. There's something we've been neglecting. I am just seeing it from the other side. There's a lot of sorrow for me in that. But the thing that I actually wanted to focus on for this is the structure of how I orient to it. I have all these reasons why my cause, and I'm going to drop the reference to aging, my cause is important. My cause requires your participation. If you don't participate, then you're interfering. And in fact, we'll try not to define good and evil, but to the extent that we're going to, what you are doing is evil by not agreeing with me. This isn't a matter of my ego trip, although secretly it is, but this isn't about my ego trip. This is about there is a necessary path for solving a real problem, and you are in the way. You are here, so you are either in the way or you are out of the way, or supporting. You support or you're a problem. That's it. That's the situation we're facing. Okay. So I took this kind of energy into other causes. I toned it down a bit. It didn't become as adamant, as militant about it, but there's definitely a kind of energy about this. When I came to understand the logic that goes into the risk to the human race of the development of artificial intelligence, when a computer becomes when a computer becomes better at doing computer science and creating artificial intelligence than human beings are, at that point there's a very rapid feedback loop, and whatever the machines create defines our future. So then the question is that a future that we want? And according to some of the best thinkers in this area that I know of, the answer is almost certainly not. Almost certainly not. That's not a good thing. But it also seems like we are inevitably heading towards some version of that. So we need to do something about this. The fervor of the logic is the same. Right? There's this, here is this problem that is in the world, and I see how it needs to be dealt with. I see a thing that needs to be addressed, and certainly I'll try to bring in humility, but I see the problem, and I can rescue the world from this problem. It's the same logic as with environmentalism. Same logic as with most forms of social justice. There is this problem in the world, and I see the problem, and I'm going to rescue the world from this problem. Maybe not me personally, but I'm going to contribute to the fight. The reason this is a problem is because there's a fundamental energy signature that, and I want to add a quick footnote here that, like, I've been thinking about these pieces for quite some time and trying to put them together. I feel like I got the last piece I needed to connect this and go, that's it. From Perry Chase, who pointed out, the way that she described it is for coaches, for people who are doing one-on-one counseling but can't call it counseling because laws, so we'll come up with this other thing and call it coaching. There might be some other legal footwork there that I don't understand, but as far as I can tell, that's the game. So with one-on-one coaching, if somebody puts themselves out as, oh yes, I help people, I help entrepreneurs who have who doubt themselves to find the stable place in themselves that they're able to be confident in their entrepreneurial decisions. Right? So there's some sort of package like that, and that's my target audience. The problem with that is that as a coach, if that's my attitude, then I am not in a relationship with my clients. I'm in a relationship with my clients' problems. So I need them to have these problems in order for me to have an income and to have something I can do. Furthermore, I need my clients to need me to solve their problem. I can't have my clients just magically solving their own problems before they pay me. Otherwise, I don't have much of a business model. The same kind of problem shows up with mental health therapy. A really terrible therapy model is one where if somebody has a problem and you stare at them, you do a little bit of hypnosis or something, and then whatever they've come to you with is cured, and they never need to see you again. There's a pretty powerful incentive in the therapist to need to do a little more work for the work to be ongoing. I think most therapists are sincere in their desire to help people, but incentives are real. And I'm not too surprised that we don't have forms of therapy that are dramatically transformative in a small amount of time and are popular. We do have ones that are very transformative in a short amount of time, but we don't prioritize mastering those, distributing them, making them accessible, because that's not what the therapy industry is about. It's about helping people. But if people don't need help, then you can't help them. And then what good are you? I mean, and then what do you do with your life? So this is, now Perry Chase is talking about this in terms of business, having a business model. As somebody who wants to help people, wait, how do you help people? What do you like? Well, turns out when you do that, you have this problem of if you need to help people, if you're going into business to help people, then you need people who need your help, and therefore you need people who are less. You need people who don't believe in their own capacity to live their lives well. And you're coming in with an attitude of, I know how to fix these people. This is not strictly necessary, but there's a basic drift in this direction. But what I'm observing is, it includes that, but is a lot larger. This has to do with the engine of making meaning in westernized cultures. This is where I run the risk of going into philosophy land. I'm trying to keep this anchored in my own lived experience. But it is really challenging because I can see the system so clearly. So clearly. Who is the author? Robin DiAngelo, I think it was, who wrote White Fragility. It's not a coincidence that the author is white. I know that the author, I think it's Robin. I think Robin has reasoning for why that is, why it had to be a white person, because here are these theories from critical race theory. But this phenomenon keeps showing up. Why is it throngs of white people who are screaming about the importance of doing protests and activism for environmentalism? I'm not saying that it's only white people, but like what I've observed over and over again, and this could just be some kind of bubble that I'm in, but I keep hearing this observation elsewhere too. So it has me go, well, maybe it's just my bubble includes them. We're just in the same bubble. So I want to account for that. Maybe I'm just not seeing the world clearly because I don't have a wide enough sample. But I'm suspicious. I'm suspicious here. Because Western culture has done an amazing job of completely demolishing its meaning-making frameworks. We can't have a religion of the westernized world. We cannot return to anything like Christendom the way that Europe was 1,000 years ago. It can't be done. Yeah, it's like, what do you do with that? What does anybody do with that? This is the problem that Nietzsche was grappling with. God is dead, and we have killed him. How shall we reconcile our actions, given that we are now the greatest murderers that have ever existed? He was talking about this problem. So there's this thing that I keep observing that gets created over and over and over again, which is the desperate need to create meaning by having something to rescue. Save the planet. So when I was a kid, it was save the whales. Like, it wasn't just save the planet. Like, there's a lot of save the planet and Captain Planet and the Planeteers. But there's like save the whales and all this stuff about making sure that you clip the little pop can plastic rings so that like the turtles don't get their necks caught in it. Like, that's something you can do, and it's your duty to take this. Only you can prevent forest fires. There's this like, only you can prevent forest fires is arguably different because there isn't as strong a rescuing thing for most of the people who are complying. But there's this thing about what would it be like if we absolutely knew that this is planned. For instance, I'm hearkening back to old intuitions for the Western mind. That there is a God, and God has a plan. You can argue about all of the theological nuances and blah, 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 but suppose we found, like, Jesus appears, wham! Maybe don't make it Jesus, whatever. But like some sort of God being shows up and says, yes, I made all of this. Right? And there's a coherent plan, and I'm tracking all of you. Yeah, you don't understand my plan, but I've got it. Right? There'd be something, I mean, it would be hard for us as a culture to validate that and trust it and so on. I don't think this would actually create a unifying thing. It's hard to imagine what kind of spiritual experience would cause the entire westernized world to collectively pause and go, cool, we now have a framework. To a large extent, that's what I'm looking at. I'm trying to figure out, is there a way to do that? And the energy that I tend to pull on from that is rescuing. There's something about, sorry, the thing that I actually wanted to gesture towards in terms of imagining God is real. If you imagine, not a demiurge, not an icon, but if you imagine somehow, you know, this is not a belief, this is not a spiritual just impression. This is something that, like, it turns out we're mistaken about some of the nuances of quantum mechanics, and we can actually prove that love creates everything. And love is consciousness. And that by being better at loving, being better at compassion, we create more heaven on earth. That everything else is downstream of that. Suppose that it turns out that we determine this, and that all of our methods of making sense of the world say exactly this. We validate it. We can even run physics experiments to prove it. I don't know what those would look like. I don't think this is true, but suppose we discover this. I think there would be a pretty significant relief from a lot of things related to stuff like social justice and environmentalism, because we would not need to make one another do something different as though there's something wrong with you and with you and with you and with this whole system and it's all screwed. Instead, there'd be a sense of, oh, it's planned, and the plan is I love. But the loving isn't manipulative. The love is about, how do I encourage a world where it is easy for everyone to love? It's not by pointing my finger. It's by being an example. This is not a well thought out thought experiment, I'm recognizing, going, dang, I think this will only work for people who already understand. And people who disagree are going to continue to disagree. I think it's just one of these bifurcating things. It's a little unfortunate. Yeah, I'm aware that what I'm trying to strike at is slippery. This would be a lot easier if I could have just stayed on the theory and then shot into this is how it relates to me. The main issue I notice myself grappling with is something like an addiction to rescuing. This this strong drift towards, it's something I have to be constantly vigilant of in these videos. Because there's like, even earlier today I was thinking, oh, here's a point I can make. Why am I trying to make this point? Oh, because it'll have this effect and it'll do this. Because I'm thinking about how to manipulate the minds of other people in order to create downstream effects to shape the world in a particular way that I think is good. But that has to start from an idea of me viewing the world as bad or less good than I can make it. And then trying to coerce systems into being different. And some people can manage within that framework in a very narrow context. But that's exactly the problem. That's exactly the problem at a systematic level. We keep trying to fix things. Note the language, we try to fix it, implying it's broken. We start from saying, how are things wrong? And then how do we fix them? Here is what I can do to help fix it, or here is my innovation. Or, oh, I can't fix it, I'm worthless. I can't contribute, I'm worthless. And so being in that kind of framework, it can't account for the full context. It can only look at this problem in isolation. There's this bizarre thing about every kind of so there, like all this stuff about reduce, reuse, recycle, which is the big thing when I was a kid. This is how we were going to save the earth. Is you know your 3 R's, and this boiled down to recycle. It's just kind of funny that because that was considered to be the last resort, but it was the one that everybody could remember and we could set up bins for. But the result of that kind of campaigning and the emphasis on environmentalism was corporate greenwashing. So you end up with things like plastic water bottles where the opening at the top is made smaller, and it's called an eco lid or something like that because we've reduced how much plastic we're using. The reason they do that, it's obviously not because they're caring predominantly for the environment. If they cared about the environment, they wouldn't offer that product. They would find something other than plastic to package their things in. It wouldn't matter about the cost effectiveness because there's no way to produce one-use plastic and not contribute to the problem. So if they actually believe in the problem and they want to fix it, they won't create the product in the first place. At the very least, make it canned water. Right? Because at least aluminum is arbitrarily recyclable. It still takes energy, but much better than plastic. But so the reason they're doing that is because it's a good marketing gimmick. This is greenwashing. And the reason it's a good marketing gimmick is they do their research and they find that it works. So there's this net effect where the attempt to get environmental concerns into the population causes people to be distracted by thinking that recycling and buying green products, which is to say that they're greenwashed, sort of absolves them of a kind of sin. We're still carrying this narrative in our culture where we have original sin and we need to absolve it. And I can be motivated by being told I have original sin. That's the whole thing with critical race theory. It's emphasizing another version of this same narrative. It's the classic, like you are mere dirt. You are a sinful creature, but it is by God's grace that you are saved. This is old. It's ancient in the Western mind. So it's not too surprising that when someone comes up with a new spin on it and they just change the labels, but it's the same energy, that it resonates with people because they can find a way to find meaning, because our entire culture has this as like an operating system for building meaning. But it doesn't have the coherent worldview. It doesn't have the coherent worldview, so it requires, I would have said back in August, it requires bullshit. It requires divorcing your heart from it. Divorcing which pieces, how you want to describe this, but it requires making it so that you don't care about truth, that you actively avoid it, and that you have systems to keep your mind from approaching the truth. Which is why you have things like critical race theory being unfalsifiable. There's no way to contend with it, not because it's true, but because there's no way to know whether it's true or not. It's true by definition according to it. That's an issue. So this whole, I lost track, too many pieces. It is so much easier to track all the pieces of what I want to say when I'm spinning in my mind, and then what I'm saying is less relevant. Yes, I can be less relevant than this. I can go on fantastic tangents. So where was I going? Yeah. So yeah, I've lost the core thread there, which is okay. The main thing that I'm seeing, this main mechanism I keep seeing, is that, oh right, greenwashing. Yes, I remember. Haha. Okay, so the issue is that when we look at a problem and then we try to solve the problem, we're engaging a part of our minds that takes things out of context to examine it, see how it works, and figure out how to work with it, what to do with it. It's our tool function. But the tool function works precisely because it takes things out of context. And, Ian McGilchrist would say this is the left hemisphere. If we want to solve the world, if you want to save the world, you can't do it by thinking that the world needs saving and then trying to figure it out. It can't be done. Because the very act of thinking that way removes perception from context. And when you're trying to account for everything, which is what save the world means, to avoid having these weird ramifications like greenwashing, to avoid making it so that each injection creates an effect elsewhere, which the Buddhists would say, you can't fix karma by adding more ego. You can't get rid of karma by adding more ego. There's a different process involved to kind of letting go. So in order to actually address the whole thing, what I'm observing, what the direction that I'm seeing as coherent, as lighting things up, as sorting things out and actually making sense, is for me to focus predominantly on dropping the places where I am trying to make meaning happen by rescuing and by hooking and by being hooked. Oh, these people are doing such terrible things to me. Oh no, they're not dealing with this huge political issue. Everything's going to be terrible. It's like being victimized. It's like, even if I don't know what I'm doing, at least I can flail my arms and feel violated by the state of the world and freaked out about it. The West is addicted. The westernized world, I should say, is addicted to this distorted process of making meaning. Because we destroyed our meaning-making methods. We basically finished killing their capacity to work in the mainstream about a century ago. John Vervaeke argues that this is why Nazism arose, because it was an attempt to create it's the natural way, like something like fascism is a very natural way to create a powerful feeling of meaning in a nihilist container. So there's this immense addiction. Part of the solution that I can see, like one part of it has got to be, you've got to break the addiction. We've got to break this addiction. But my inclination to say it with any pressure is an example of the phenomenon. So it's like, this is where I get really spinny of like, I want to contribute to something good. How do I do that without getting into the rescuer thing? And this is where it gets really tricky for me. I can do it often, but it's hard. But I can be much clearer about it, of recognizing, rather than trying to affect the system, I can affect me. I can notice where I am rescuing and notice that it is not good for me to do that. That's very clean. It's very simple. In fact, doing any of the victim triangle stuff, any of Cartman's triangle, that seems to be one big part. There's another part that I notice is missing, which is that I need, and I think this is a place where somehow, even though it has the same logical structure, it feels different for me in my head. We'll see what happens when I say it. I think we all need a coherent, meaning-making framework. I suspect it has to be a meta-meaning-making framework, something that lets us navigate the meaning-making process in a way that at the meta level feels meaningful. If that didn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. I'm mentioning it as like a nuance of, this is at the edge of my thinking, and it's something that I'm learning how to live. It's part of why I'm playing with so many different frameworks, many of which have a lot of very negative opinions of each other. Like I have a deep love of science. I'm also dabbling in astrology. Combine those two, I have a lot of opinions about people who try to combine them and say hubba wubba, flow of consciousness, quantum field, hubba hubba. Like lots of judgment there. I have a lot of energy still there. I have a video about that from a few days ago. Yeah, I think what I'm sensing here is like this is me going on a bit of a ramble with something that could have been said fairly briefly. If I had had this compiled, I'm feeling a little embarrassment about that. Because I'm trying to control the impressions of my audience. I want you to know that I am an excellent presenter when I try. Yeah. Part of this is just me bumbling around and synthesizing all the pieces. I am excited about where this is going. Yeah, I feel like I could probably try to summarize all of that. I don't think I'm going to. I feel reasonably complete. Tomorrow I have I'm doing for those of you who may be watching to the end, if you've gotten to here, I'm pretty impressed. Tomorrow's live stream, 9 a.m. Pacific time, is going to be another chat with a friend of mine, Logan. Never uses last names, like Bruce, I think it is. But I know him through Rebel Wisdom. Went to the Rebel Wisdom Festival several months ago and have been doing basically a circling group together. A group of, what is it, 6 of us? 5 of us? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5. There's 5 of us. Talking in a circle. Just being connected to each other, and helping to explore what kind of space might be good for us to explore, given what kind of future that we want to see unfold. Rebel Wisdom is a really fascinating alternative news source, I guess you could say, in journalistic investigation about the transition that the human race is going through. and about how to make sense of the world and our own and our roles in it as everything changes and our normal methods of making sense of the world are breaking down. So Logan and I talked about discipline several months ago, and he wanted to have he wanted to touch in about it. So I have a pretty different view of discipline than the standard Western model. Yeah, so if that interests you, tune in or catch it later. It should stream on my Facebook page, and it'll also be up on YouTube like all of these videos are. Cool. That's all I've got.